twilight hours, voices sing tales of hope and heartbreak, everything a rhythmic blend of dreams.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Bryan Powell. I'm Associate Professor of Music Education at Montclair State University, which is in northern New Jersey. And I'm also one of the founding co-editors of the Journal of Popular Music Education. So we're excited that you're joining us. As you know from the description, our goal is to talk through the journal, the mission of the journal, opportunities to submit, maybe some ideas, some tips and things to demystify the process, and then also hopefully leave time to have a robust conversation at the end. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and co-creator of the Journal of Popular Music Education, Gareth Smith. We'll do some introductions of the panelists, and then we'll kind of kick it off from there. But if at any point, if you have a question, you don't necessarily need to save it to the end. You can put it in the chat, and I'll also be watching the chat and kind of moderating some of those questions as they come in. So over to you, Gareth.
Good morning. Yeah, thanks for hosting this, ISME. Thanks, Ryan, for putting us all together, and it's good to see everybody here. As Brian mentioned, he and I co-founded the journal. We started the process over 10 years ago now, and I've long been involved with ISME. I think I went to my first ISME conference in 2008 and was on the Instrumental and Vocal Teaching Forum, as it was at the time, and became a board member for a handful of years. And missed out on an in-person conference because of COVID, but learned a lot from being a board member at ISME, and I'm delighted to bring the two together for the purposes of this webinar. So. Yeah, having a Journal of Popular Music Education was initially my idea, I suppose. I was at the time working in higher education in England, preparing undergraduates for music, for the music industry, and teaching what I suppose is broadly called popular music, and found that there wasn't a lot of that discussed in the music education journals. So I was going to popular music studies conferences, like the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, IASPM conferences, and at the pop music conferences, they weren't really talking about education. So it seemed like there was somewhere in the middle where maybe the popular music studies people could talk about education, and maybe the music education people could talk about popular music. And Bryan, had many conversations with Bryan, and with some of our, many of our senior colleagues in the field, and sort of tested the idea of whether there might be a possible space for something that combined these two. And we proposed the journal to Intellect, who were very receptive to the idea of having this kind of somewhere in between popular music and education. And of course, it's become so much more than that. And this always happens when you put out a call for papers or you give a title to something, people rally in ways you couldn't possibly have imagined. So, we imagine the journal as a space, for something to do with popular music and something to do with education and something to do with whatever popular music education is. It's also become a space for discussing community music and overlaps into a little bit of ethnomusicology, a little bit of popular music studies, some hip hop, which was always part of popular music, but also kind of excluded almost sort of by default because of the sort of people who are writing for the journal and in the other journals in music education. So anyway, hopefully it's become a hospitable place for people to write about what they care about in the combination of music teaching and learning and making in a whatever we think popular is. I once put a paper out with in front of popular in brackets, unpopular music, because maybe a lot of the music isn't literally popular, but it sounds like it would be if more people knew about it. Anyway, that's enough, I think, about the kind of, a little bit more of the mission, I suppose. We were, the basic premise of the journal, as I mentioned, was to combine these sort of two or three things. And we were interested, and I say Brian and I have now stepped aside from editing the journal. So David Knapp is the editor of the journal now. He'll be talking momentarily. When we set the journal up, it was about trying to critique the notion of popular music, kind of sort of, and I guess really just invite as many people as possible and invite as many perspectives as possible. We didn't want to tell people what popular music education was. We wanted to create and sort of curate a space where after a handful of years, people could look at JPME and go, aha, that seems to be what the discourse tells us popular music education is. And actually, a colleague of ours, Alison, whose name I've forgotten. Brian, do you remember Alison's last name? That's very cheeky.
Davis.
Alison Davis, thank you, is in the process of publishing a paper, if it's not already out, looking at a kind of content analysis of JPME over the last 8 years, so we can somewhat authoritatively say, or she can, Dr. Davis can authoritatively tell us what popular music education is based on the content of the journal. So I think that's enough from me. David Knapp,
Hello, everyone. My name is David Knapp. I'm a assistant professor of music education at Florida State University. I came to know ISME not as far back as 2008 as Gareth, but in 2012 in Thessaloniki. That was my first ISME conference. And my bag at the time was a lot of community music stuff, but the community music activities I was doing at the time were popular music based. I didn't really see a home for popular music, so I was just sort of on the side doing my thing. And I think one of the functions of the journal is to create a space for people to come together and build community around these activities. Because I was just sort of off the side doing my own thing. I didn't know that there's a community of peers and colleagues doing similar things. So then I came to know Gareth and Bryan, and they tapped me to take over the journal as they moved on to other things, not greener pastures. Just they got too important. So now now I'm doing the journal. Yeah. So I've been doing the journal now for I guess about 6 months. It was kind of like a slow handover process. And I'll introduce Nick in a moment. I believe Nick's title is editorial assistant, but he can correct me. But so Nick is doing a lot of the back end stuff, and then I'm kind of doing the more scholarly kind of stuff in terms of deciding, you know, the initial. Again, Nick's going to talk about process, but one of the initial things that I do when a paper comes in is I decide whether or not it's pertinent to this journal. And so, you know, a lot of you are probably here because you're interested in publishing with the journal. So let me sort of tell you a little bit about that. First off, the journal has grown a lot. And Gareth and Bryan can perhaps speak on its infancy, but Allison Davis's article, which is still under review, Gareth, we're not sure whether or not it's going to get published, still under review. One of the things that she told me anecdotally was that the abstracts for the first few issues were not very useful for her to do her content analysis. They didn't have a clearly defined method. There weren't any theoretical frameworks. It was just kind of like, hey, here's something that I was kind of interested in, and I did it. And I imagine Gareth and Bryan were thinking at the time, like, let's get this thing up and running, right? And this is a new journal. We're going to get some good articles in there. And this is not to besmirch anybody's work in those first few issues, but I think Gareth and Bryan would probably agree that the journal has matured in some sense since then. I think that probably also parallels maturity in the popular music field in terms of research, where there's more people in the space. There's more precise and elevated research in the space. So that's one thing that's happened. Another thing that's happened is as the journal, and when I say the journal has been successful, I'm also going by metrics like the number of downloads, the number of institutional subscriptions. There are a lot more people looking at this journal now than there were 10 years ago, due to the work that Bryan and Gareth put in. And one of the results of that is that the journal is much more international than it used to be. I mean, it used to be a lot of the United States and a lot of the UK. But now, if you look at submissions that are coming in, there's an issue that's coming out in just a matter of weeks now. And it's mostly about, I kind of forget. I mean, it's a general issue, so it doesn't really have a core narrative. But I looked at the places that the articles are being published about, and we have a quantitative paper from Spain. We have some sort of analysis of something going on in North Carolina in the United States. Does anybody else remember the other ones? Anyway, like every single article, there's 7 of them. Every single article is a different spot in the world. And I find that kind of inspiring, right? The journal has grown, it's become more popular, and it's becoming more global. So I think that speaks to the people here in this room in ISME in general. And that gets to a point that Gareth was making, is that, I mean, what it like, popular music is a variety of things. Education is a variety of things. And so then when you think about what popular music education looks like globally, gosh, I don't know, like that looks like any number of things. There's not one singular vision of what popular music education might look like. Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to say is, as the journal has grown in popularity, one thing that's had to happen because there's so many more submissions is there's a lot more rejections, and I that shouldn't be if anybody in this room is interested in publishing, that should not be scary at all. It just means you need to be a little bit more thoughtful in how you present an article to a journal. So the first thing that I would say gets a desk reject, and Nick will talk about process, but essentially desk reject is me as the editor. I take a look at this, and rather than even send it out for peer review, I decide that this is not suitable for the journal. And then if it is suitable for the journal, then I send it out for peer review. One of the main reasons why something is desk rejected is it's not about popular music education. It might be about education. There was a journal article that we received a few weeks ago that was about something about brass instruments in like a typical wind ensemble. And that just got a desk reject. I was into it. I was like, yes, where is this person going talking about brass instruments and popular music? And I read through the whole thing. I was like, oh, they're not. So that person was probably just thinking like, let's throw it out there. I got this thing that I wrote. I'm just going to send it to a journal and see what happens. Well, what happens is that wastes about 15 minutes of my time and you get a desk rejection. So don't do that. Make sure that it's about popular music. Here's another reason why. Maybe it's not about education. There's another great article that I just read that was a cool analysis of what's going on with Spotify and how there are fewer bands in like the top 100 and there's more solo artists. And I was like, hey, this is super interesting. And I would enjoy reading this, but I would not enjoy reading this in this journal because it's just an analysis of Spotify. There's zero connections to what's going to take place in education. Granted, education is very broad. This doesn't have to be classroom. This could be community. However you're conceiving of education, if your article starts out with, this is what I'm talking about popular music, and this is what I mean by education, and here's why I'm putting it together, then it is very much appropriate for the journal. Okay, and then the next reason why something might get a desk reject, and I think this is probably something that we all in the room should pay attention to, and I invite any other scholars here who have successfully published to sort of chime in about this. But sometimes stuff is really cool and interesting, but it's not research. And this sometimes breaks my heart a little bit because I'll read a really cool article and it's like, man, that's nice, but there's no purpose to this article. Like it's not advancing an argument. And I want to be very clear for those who kind of understand different methodologies and epistemologies. Myself, nor Gareth or Bryan or Nick, nor anything related to the journal, this is not necessarily a positivist kind of journal. We're not thinking that something needs to be experimental research where there's precise research questions and then a method that backs it up. Those kind of articles are very much welcome in the journal, but we also welcome more theoretical articles, philosophical articles. So I'm not trying to discount other methodologies, but there needs to be a purpose to the research. And even better if there are precise research questions that are getting answered in any number of ways. And then to support that purpose and research questions, there should be a precise method that is described well, that I know that when I send this out to peer review, the peer reviewers will have something to, what's a good turn of phrase, hang their hat on. They know exactly what they're able to respond to. Sometimes it's a well-written piece, but it really comes off as like a graduate student term paper rather than a clearly described research process. So I would I guess maybe I kind of want to open this up to anybody, but let me throw it to Gareth real quick. Gareth, what do you think about what I was saying there about the nature of research? Anything that's in the journal has to have some sort of direction and purpose, and it needs to be scholarly. That likely involves research questions and a method, but if it's philosophical, it needs to have something else. For example, a theoretical framework. So what would you say about that, Gareth?
I would agree. In the past, when I was editor of the journal, and my opinion mattered, I think that would have been pretty accurate. Yeah. Agreed. There were a handful of times where we received really interesting things that weren't really research, and that's fine. And I've suggested to people in the past maybe they would go in, for instance, a local. In the US, we have these music education associations for each state, and they publish a magazine with like cool and interesting things. And I've suggested people put things in there in the past. And the Association for Popular Music Education has a blog, and maybe it can go on there sometimes. And I felt a little bit insulting sometimes. And I didn't like to say, "Thanks for submitting this to the journal." Actually, it's more of a blog post. But also we founded this as a scholarly journal, and there are things that make things scholarly, and if it doesn't kind of meet that mark, and I think you said it right, David, in terms of there needs to be a theoretical framework and a kind of verifiable method, and sections where we expect findings at the end and takeaways for the profession and things. So I'd agree, but really, for people who may be newer to scholarly work. We lean really heavily on, or collaborate, I suppose is the word, collaborate really closely with our peer reviewers, right? It's not just the editor who gets to decide these things. David mentioned that sometimes things will be a desk reject, something will arrive and it clearly doesn't seem to be research. But if we have any questions, we send it out to our peers, and our peers review it in the peer review process. And that really helps. It doesn't fall on the editor's shoulders to decide if something is or is not, of the right sort of thing. And I know when I was editing with Bryan, we would send things out for review that we weren't really sure about, and they would come back with sometimes really positive reviews, sometimes really scathing reviews, and sometimes a combination of each. And it's that collaboration, I think, with the community that, as David mentioned the word community, it's really become sort of a journal that belongs to the field. David's editing it, but it really is everyone who's writing, everyone who's reading, who gets to decide what counts as research in this space.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gareth. Then let's think about, and I don't know everybody's position in this room right now, but this being sort of a student forum kind of thing, I imagine that you're somewhere towards entering the career, I suppose, the career of scholarship, whether that's independent research or associated with an institution. So I guess it would be helpful to talk about how one might turn their ideas into published work. Right. There's probably many people in this room that are doing super rad stuff at their institution because this journal has a global audience. And let me also say one other thing. I think it also is younger. I think this journal is younger. Maybe that's because of popular music. I don't know, but I think there's something about this that this is it's a forward-looking look at the field, which I think is, perhaps naturally, younger participants, and then also because of popular music. But I think, this is a ripe place for younger scholars to have cool and innovative ideas to enter into the journal. So, the most obvious advice that hopefully everybody here is already following is go ahead and look at what's been published in the journal in the past. If you have a nice piece that you've already written for some previous purpose, perhaps a term paper or something, and you wanted to turn that into a journal submission, just look at what's been done. Now, because the journal has a lot of different methods, it's going to be a little bit all over the place in terms of the way that it looks. But I had to send an article back to somebody a few weeks ago because there weren't any headings. And so this very much seemed like a term paper. They just submitted it. And it wasn't really a desk reject. It was like, hey, could you restructure this and resend it? So, but if you're looking at prior issues of the journal, you would see, oh, there's like a clear formatting to how these things happen. And then kind of find a piece that maybe is similar to yours methodologically, structurally, and just sort of adapt yours to fit that. I guess I would, let me say two more things, and then I'll turn it over to Nick to talk about the process really quick. And then perhaps we can open it up to you all to ask some questions about some potential pieces that you might want to submit, and we can kind of, workshop some stuff a little bit about what could fit in the journal. Right. So the two last things that I'll say is there's two other items of articles that we sometimes publish in the journal. There's one thing called a practices and perspectives piece. And that is meant for really, really exceptional ideas that maybe fall outside the bounds in the confines of peer-reviewed research. So as an example, there's a scholar in the United States named Drew Coles and he does really great things with implementing hip hop in the classroom. And he just wants to get that perspective out. So he wrote this really great 5,000 word piece about Beyonce, and it's perfect for like a classroom activity. And so we wanted to get that out there. It's very nicely written, rather than him having to do all this peer reviewed research and compare, A/B testing. This class got this lesson plan. This, like he doesn't want to do all that. He just wants to get that perspective out there. So practices and perspectives. That's another form of scholarship that can happen in the journal. And then finally, book reviews. We do book reviews. We're trying to consistently do one for each issue. So I think the first piece that I ever had published was not a book review, but an album review. And that was like a really, really great way for me to get my hand on the genre of academic writing before having to do a full-on piece. So I just want to mention those as two opportunities for everybody in this room. If you have something that you're interested in that you think would be a book review or practice perspectives, and you will kind of like test it out with us, just go ahead and email us, and we'll let you know whether or not we think that would be a good fit. Yes, before I turn it over to Nick, Gareth.
Thank you. I don't want to take up too much time. I'll just say where the practices and perspectives came from, because I think it was you were just about to put out a second ever issue of the journal, and we received a 10,000 word exposition from an English professor. So it was beautifully written. It was this fantastic piece of writing, and he'd been teaching harmonica online for the last 30 years or something, and it was. He was like, I've written this thing about my work teaching harmonica. Please publish it. And it had no citations, no references, no method. But it had no reference, because he was an English professor, so he didn't know our field. There's no reference to kind of anything in the field. It was just, it kind of existed in a sort of vacuum. But it was so beautifully written, and it was such a cool kind of perspective on this unique practice that Bryan and I were sort of scratching our heads about how we could try and get this. Like, it seemed like it'd be really interesting for the journal's audience. And so we asked the publisher if we could please include a section called Practices and Perspectives, and they said yes. So anyway, it was inspired by this really fabulous piece of writing by Adam Gussow, which is in Volume 1, Issue 2, about teaching online harmonica. So that's enough.
Okay. Run, don't walk to the JPME website to get a hold of that that article. Okay, Nick. Nick is our editorial assistant. What's your title, Nick?
We're still workshopping the titles, but I think we landed on managing editor, but it's like a journalist system.
Yeah. So yeah, what do you do, and maybe give some advice on the process?
Sure, yeah. So hey everyone, my name's Nick Piato. I'm a PhD student at Northwestern University in Chicago. So I'm just gonna kind of talk through the really exciting, exhilarating submission process, as well as some common pitfalls or success stories we've had. So the first thing you kind of want to check, and David kind of mentioned earlier, is like the type of submission. He mentioned we have 3 research articles, right? Your standard, research article, the practices and perspectives, which I guess you could kind of think of as like more of like a elevated blog post or like practitioner articles. We love to see those. And then for the reviews, he did mention book reviews. I've also heard talks about album reviews, concert reviews. We've been kind of looking into, so that's another possibility. You could go in that direction. And then as you're going through the submission page, you'll select what your type of submission is. So out of those 3, and then you'll select whether it's for a general issue or for a special issue. So general issue, you can submit anything, any topic. It won't be categorized, but we do have a few special issues out right now. One is for Americana and roots music, which I believe the deadline is approaching or here. We also have one about extremes in popular music education. So think, fascism, surveillance, that type of stuff. And then we are going to have a call for papers coming up soon for a hip hop special issue. We'll be collaborating with another journal on that one. So when you go through the process, select the type of submission, select whether it's general or for a special issue. And then one thing we see a lot that can kind of slow down the process is not having anonymized your article. So you really want to go through and make sure you've removed any identifying information, your name, your place of work, and that includes the title page within the article and also the citations. There's a way to do that in Microsoft Word. If anyone has questions about that, just let me know. But you can look that up, how to anonymize your article in Word. So make sure all that stuff is kind of taken care of. And then what you're going to do is submit through the platform. And like David mentioned, he'll do the desk review. So he'll see, does this fit within the scope of our journal, combining popular music and education. If it gets past there, it's going to go on to peer review. So that's where we kind of take, we try to find scholars within the field who might be knowledgeable about the area that you're researching. There will be 2. It's fully anonymous. We send it out. That process can be quick, but usually especially now, it's been taking a little bit longer because you'll get reviewers who they're professors, so they're busy. They'll send it back. They'll say, if they're nice, they'll send it back and they'll say, I can't review this right now. More often than not, we'll also get no answer. So then we have to find a new peer reviewer. So that can take a little bit of time. But it usually, once we get a peer reviewer, it'll take about a month for them to review your article. And then they'll come back with kind of a few different options. One is a blatant accept, which is pretty rare, where we just got one that is fully accepted by a peer reviewer. Another option would be minor revisions. So they'll give you comments and you can kind of edit it in a pretty quick amount of time and send it back. There's also major revisions, which are a little more extensive revisions. And we try to get those back within 4 weeks, but if you need more time to complete those major revisions, it's totally fine. Just communicate with us. And then they could also send back a reject, where in that case, we'd send it back and you could, of course, workshop it and resubmit if you'd like. But comments will be available for all of those. If you get major revisions, what will happen is you kind of workshop your article, resubmit it, hopefully within 4 weeks. And then we'll send it out for another round of peer review. Then in that case, if it's accepted or they send back with minor revisions, we're into the kind of publishing stage. So we'll be going back and forth with Intellect. They'll do the copy editing, the typesetting, and we'll be exchanging proofs of your articles kind of back and forth. It's really important once you get to this stage to be mindful of your communication and your timing, because that's where stuff can kind of get lost and just kind of delay the process a little. So we'll send those back and forth, and then it'll finally get to the stage for publication. If we're far enough along in the process, that means it'll be published online first. So we'll come out the full article on our website, and then it will be incorporated into the next print issue or the special issue that you submitted for. So some common pitfalls we see. Of course, the big one, right, is not knowing the scope of the journal, right? Which David and Gareth and Bryan mentioned too, right? Which is, maybe you're talking about popular music, but there's no education focus, right? Or vice versa. Submitting practices and perspectives as a research article. Just make sure when you're doing that process of submission that you select the specific type that you're going for, because it can delay the process if you submit in the wrong category. Another one we run into a lot is after you've done your major revisions, and you send back your revised manuscript, you're also supposed to send a document detailing all of the comments and how you address those comments from the reviewers. If we don't get that document, we have to have another back and forth. You have to make the document. So it kind of slows down the process. So just know if you're submitting your revised manuscript after major revisions, we need that document as well. And again, everyone mentioned, kind of lack of clarity in research is another big one we see, right? Around your method or your sort of philosophical frame. And yeah, success stories, just active communication. Like hopefully like it's coming across to like everyone who's involved with the journal, is open to responding to questions and easily reachable. So if you have a question about either something you submitted or you're thinking of submitting, just shoot us an email. We're very happy to communicate kind of what we're expecting or looking for. Timely resubmissions, and yeah, just kind of clarity around your research questions, your methods, and kind of what you're submitting for PMPs or research article or book review. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to drop a link in the chat, which is some more guidance from Intellect about how to structure your submissions, and kind of some other parts about the journal. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and thanks.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Yeah, Bryan, do you want to take over and facilitate some conversations here?
Yeah. So, some of what we just presented are things that you can kind of find online. Hopefully, there are some kind of tips and perspectives. I think all the panelists, we have a suggestion that we can offer at the end, but we want to kind of pause here and just see if there are specific questions. It could be about the process, it could be about the mission or the vision of the journal. And it doesn't have to just be about publishing in our journal. It could be like, hey, I have this thing and I want to figure like how do I understand where the best home might be for my scholarship. So if you have a question, would be happy to take those now. I'll pause for maybe 20 seconds. And if no one has a question, you can also unmute or you can put it in the chat. I'll kind of come back and we can, the panelists, maybe we'll share like one perspective or success story or something to consider or whatever the case may be. So Justin's question around the practices and perspectives articles, are they peer reviewed? They're not peer reviewed in the same way that we would send out a scholarly article. In the case of Drew Cole's article, David worked with the author back and forth, or Gareth and I have done that in the past. Sometimes I might send what we call PNP, practices and perspectives, to a colleague or someone who's more knowledgeable saying, hey, would you read through this and just give me some suggestions or any of those kind of pointers? But it doesn't go through the traditional peer review process of 2 peer reviewers over 4 weeks. And then when it's published, and I don't have issue 1, 2 in front of me, but this is a copy of the journal, and I know I've got my blur on, so this can be problematic. But just here, it would say like practices and perspectives. Oh, thank you. I feel spotlighted. And then it would say, it would give us the remainder of the article. And so it looks and feels just like a research article, but it could be 4,000 to 5,000 words. Usually it comes towards the back of the issue. And then in the editorial introduction, we'll say, hey, here's a practice and perspectives that is shining light on exactly like the name implies, someone's practices, what they're doing, or a perspective on something around popular music education, a provocation, a challenge, things like that. So I often think that the PNPs are perhaps equally interesting, if not sometimes more interesting than maybe a traditional research article, because it gives a little bit of room to get to the point and say the thing that you wanted to say. But that being said, JPME is primarily a peer-reviewed scholarly publication. And so we found some other outlets for a collection of PNPs in the past and might do something similar moving forward. Thanks for the question. Any other questions, comments? I think I'm supposed to wait 7 seconds, but that's in person. I don't know in a Zoom world how long a teacher is supposed to wait. So while you're thinking of, I'll challenge the panelists, access the table of contents to the journal. Do you mean online? I would assume. Usually, yes. If you go to the Intellect website, you can see the publication. You can see the journal article titles and the authors and an abstract for their article, and then to access the full article, you need access. Um, so yeah, Gareth just put a chat in there, and you've got to kind of click around as well. I don't know if I have permission to share my screen. Oh, I do. This is very exciting. Let me make sure I'm sharing the correct um, element. So when you come to the landing page here, and if I scroll down and you click on, there's tabs here. If you click on content, you'll see a spinny wheel. Oh, okay, it was coming up. I just got impatient. And then you can see the titles, you can see the authors, you can get a little bit more information. I think my internet connection doesn't like that I'm trying to do all these things at once. So you can find that there. Um, any other questions? All right, so panelists, let's go around. I'll start to give you time to figure out what you want to say and just share either a suggestion, maybe reiterate something that we've already mentioned, or put something there. And then, as Nick said, if you have ideas, please feel free to put them in the chat. We would love to check that out. My initial suggestion is, when we would get an article, the first thing, I mean, it's exciting to as a journal editor, it's exciting to receive submissions. Anytime we get that email, it's like, hey, someone submitted something, all of us are like, let's go. This is great. Sometimes, if we're getting those all the time, we're like, oh, everyone slow down. This is too much. Let's spread it out. But when we initially open that, we've received articles that don't mention the word popular music at all, as David Knapp was saying earlier. We've also received articles that seem to be lacking connection to the existing research. And so, ideally, if you're putting something forward, you don't have to only cite the Journal of Popular Music Education, but, and I'm going to turn my camera off just so that hopefully my audio is okay. However, citing articles in the journal lets us know that you're engaging with scholarship in and around popular music education. If you submit something that seems to ignore a lot of the more recent scholarship in a particular area, these are a lot of red flags that sometimes pop up. And so, as we think about getting your submission ready for the journal, as we said previously, as David said, look at other articles that have been submitted. Find, maybe some citations within the popular music education space that you can bring in, because it is an emerging field, but it's also a pretty well established area at where there has been a lot of research. And so, if I'm looking through an article and it's formatted like an article, it has citations, it's connected to relevant scholarship. As a journal editor, that's something that I feel comfortable sending that out for peer review. And oftentimes I might, as I'm reading through a submission, I always scroll to the reference section because I want to see, are these recent citations, are they connected to relevant research? Are they and as editors, we're not the experts in all research in all fields of popular music education. But just as you're kind of thinking about doing that, sometimes adding a couple citations that are more recent, adding some citations from the journal in which you're submitting, is just an indicator to the reviewers and to the editors that you're engaged with scholarship in that area. And so that's always something that I would suggest that you do. It doesn't take a very long to do that sometimes, just adding a couple other, citations or making sure it's formatted correctly, but it can really make the difference as we're reviewing, these initial submissions and figuring out where to send them out for peer review. So that's my kind of initial tip for right now. Gareth, can I put you on the spot and just share anything that is top of mind?
Sure. Well, I took notes earlier on. So according to my notes, what was top of mind an hour and a half ago, was to say I think it's important to the publication process, from submission to publication is always a process. And maybe it happens once in a blue moon, but really infrequently does someone submit something and it's just published. There's always revisions because it's always a collaboration with the peer reviewers and the editor. So with that in mind, I think it's important to express yourself and use your voice and not try to sort of suppress your you in an article submission in sort of service of, the what can look like constraints of scholarly writing. It's important to honor the kind of structure and style and necessary components of scholarly writing, I think. But I think the style is there to help you. The journal is there to help you get your research out in the world, not to kind of crush your soul and, fit you into a box. So, and it can sometimes feel a bit like that. I've certainly felt that way. But I would encourage people to, lead with who you are and what you do, and because that's what draws people to the articles, right? People want to read cool, exciting, expressive, original things. So that's my advice. Be you.
BU, he says, which is also the institution that he teaches at, Boston University. That's great. I like that, man. I want to segue from that because I was kind of thinking the same thing. It's like when I was early in scholarship, I would get really nervous to send something and I would just spend a lot of time revising, thinking, oh, this isn't good enough yet. It's not. And I realized like I was totally getting in my own way and I should just submit it. So though a lot of our conversation today has been about here's what we'd really like to see from you before you submit. And please do listen to all that advice. I also think Gareth's advice is great, which is like if you've got this thing that you're like really passionate about and you're, like maybe not like an expert, but like you're pretty darn smart about this thing, and you went through all of the steps of developing this in terms of academic rigor, it's probably good, right? Go ahead and submit it. Like maybe it's not 100% there, but if it's like 90%, go ahead and submit it, right? So I think Gareth's absolutely right. There shouldn't be a barrier to submission because you're afraid that it's going to get rejected or it's not good enough. If it meets the standards of the journal in terms of being about popular music education and it having, an ascribed methodology that's been, detailed in the article, go ahead and submit it. Because I think, reading through some of these ideas that y'all had or some of the work that y'all are doing that I'm reading in the chat here, sounds like y'all are doing rad stuff, and it would be a shame if it didn't get out there into the world.
David, I just wanted to highlight Jeremy's question. I don't know if you saw it in the chat.
So I would say that action-based research is fine if you're couching it amongst, kind of other citations and the methodology around action-based research. If it's something that you just want to kind of engage from a conference presentation about like, hey, here's this thing I did in my classroom, here's my perspectives, but you're not going to go total into kind of autoethnography or whatever, then maybe a practice and perspectives could work. I think that you have some options, but we're open to, narrative studies and descriptive studies, and I think there's enough out there with action research that you can couch it with existing scholarship to provide the framework and the approach that you use to engage in that research. But we're open to it now, but obviously, David, it's you're in the editorial directorship now, so over
That's
to you.
right. Yeah. No, action-based research is great. And I would say that there's sort of like a constellation of methodologies that are related to that, right? I'm not exactly sure what your presentation was about, but also design-based research is I mean, there's all these related methodologies, and so as long as you approach the article with a clear description of what you were doing, throw in some citations to make people happy, then it's probably gonna be great. Yeah, Brian's point about it could also be a practices and perspectives. That's an interesting point. I think it totally could. A lot of action-based stuff could be easily turned into a P&P versus other methodologies, maybe not so much. So I guess that also depends on like what your intent is. Is the intent of this to share something cool that's been done, or is the intent of this to come up with some sort of information that could be shared, vis-a-vis research?
Morning, everybody. Sorry, I just felt like it was only be appropriate that I jumped in and first echoed a thank you. And then also to kind of address what you were asking, I definitely think that I would like for it to be practitioner based and informed how people are working with students in real time. But I also think that there's a framework that I've been grappling with for a long time in my teaching that is teaching students how to interpret what they like about their genres or artists that are particular to them and being able to articulate that to others in a very clear and concise way. So I think I still need to spend some more time grappling on it, but I definitely appreciate the insight. This is helpful.
Well, Jeremy, thank you. Thank you for piping in with like the specific idea there. I've had an issue recently in my editorial role where every now and then somebody will submit something that is a theoretical piece, and it's not philosophical. They're essentially developing a new theoretical framework. In the particular cases I'm talking about, I didn't have to think about it too deeply because it was easy for me to say like, hey, please reconsider this and then resubmit. But in your case, it's like you don't necessarily want to do something that's like experimental or quasi-experimental or qualitative. It seems like you're wanting to develop a theory of something, come up with a new framework. So if I could, I don't know, out of the four of us, you're the smartest, right, Gareth? So can I throw it to you? How would you handle this
The
situation?
cleverest sounding accent is what it is.
Oh, that's right. Right. Sorry, it's just your accent. I thought you were actually smart. In Jeremy's case, this is grounded in the sense that he's doing work in real classrooms. He's taking a bit of theory here and a bit of theory there and positing this new thing. How would you advise this?
I'm not entirely sure. I think I would. I think in the editor's position, I'd be inclined to send it out for peer review. I really do kind of lean on those collaborators. I think it's because I sort of I'm interested in getting people's if something's interesting and it's related to the thing that the journal's about. If it's about popular music education and it's interesting, I sort of want, I want other people in the field to help me understand how this makes sense. So I think I would send it out to reviewers, get feedback, and together we would turn this into the thing that it is. Because I'm not interested in saying, well, it doesn't fit this template that I have in my brain,
Right.
ergo it doesn't work. And I think that's one of the risks of, and I think it's part of the reason that Bryan and I wanted to step away from the journal is making sure it doesn't always become the thing we expect it to be, right? So that's what I would do. I would send it out to peer reviewers and collaborate to make it into a new kind of a thing.
So then how how might Jeremy frame this piece? And I'm kind of asking for myself here because I'm thinking what I would do if I were writing this or if I was coaching somebody on this, I would say that's it's not it's not a positivist kind of thing, and it's not exactly a philosophical piece, but sort of name that the purpose of this article is to detail a new framework, perhaps name the framework because people like that. So that's the purpose. So instead of a research question, that's the purpose. And then you spend the next 15, 20 pages sort of building the philosophical, theoretical building blocks of this framework, perhaps with some embedded instances of how you've used it in your classroom.
Well, I think that would be I'd be interested in why are you showing me this? So it's the sort of it's the how it's been useful to you in the past, and then and then suggestions for how you see it might be helpful. And I think that's again where the peer reviewers come in, colleagues is how do you see this to be helpful? And maybe because the person who's written and they can't see beyond their own perspective. So it's like, well, is this useful? How is it useful? Where is it useful? What are the use cases, I think? And if it's not appropriate for the Journal of Popular Music Education, sometimes your rejection is a good thing. It's like it doesn't belong here, so you find the place it does belong. And then people who are looking for these things can find them. I think the use case is how is this, turn to other people and find out how the because that's me getting out of my own way. Then if I can't see how to use it, doesn't mean that's my fault.
Thank you all. This is extremely helpful. I think I have a few options to think about and grapple with over the next few weeks.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy.
Questions are good. Let's keep them coming. You can put them in the chat or raise the hand, unmute, whatever works. While people are thinking about that, I do want to put a plug in for the ISME Special Interest Group. This is, an activity of that group. If you are an ISME member, I'd encourage you to join the Special Interest Group for Popular Music Education. We've been under programmed, I think, in the last couple of years, but we're looking to both build some community and some connection, maybe provide more opportunities like this. So if there's an opportunity or if there's a desire, feel free to reach out. All of us, I know David just did, but we'll all put our emails in the chat, and you're welcome to reach out. But I would encourage you to join the ISME Popular Music Education SIG, and become an active member. If you have ideas, share those, because we are one of the foundational reasons that Gareth and I started the journal was to build community and support for like-minded people that were, looking to find connections to others who are doing similar work in education. So if we can help support that community, we would love to do that. It would be fun to do something, an informal meetup at the ISME conference in Montreal. We hope to see you all there. But before then, if there's anything we can do to help make those connections, support, and build community, we would be most interested in doing that. Gareth is actually the founding convener or leader of the ISME PME SIG, and David doesn't know it, but he's probably a future organizer of this group as well. So, and another organizer might be in this group. So if there's any way that we can help build community, we'd be happy to do that. So I will put out the call again. If you have any questions, thoughts, connections, suggestions for research, something you've been thinking about, because talking through your project might connect or click for someone else who's also, has a similar question. So feel free to put it in chat or unmute.
Think the point that was just raised here, that said popular music where I am is different from popular music where you are, is really important. And, something that, David, I think it was David had mentioned, that the journal has kind of grown in scope in this way. Like it has become more international. Like we're really curious, I think, for submissions that kind of deal with this, like as popular music is, spreading through, technological means and interacting with cultures, all around the world. I think this group in particular could have a lot of really interesting things to say in that regard. So I guess that would be my tip, is to kind of hone in on that question, because I think there's a lot of submissions, or areas of research. There are ways you could respond to that.
Well, my internet's acting up just a little bit. So, David Knapp, if you want to take us home with any final thoughts, maybe a question pops in, I'll hand it over to you just so that you have a better connection and a more vibey background than I do.
Yeah. Sure thing. Yeah. Yeah. Right on, Nick. I think you said it well, man. I'm sort of going over the chat again and looking at some of these contexts where people are teaching, and my takeaway is like, man, I'd like to know more about that. Right. So I would simply say, as sort of like a final call here, is like, and I'm underlining what Gareth said earlier, be bold, be yourself, and chances are the field is going to benefit from your perspective. So please do send stuff. And I'll reiterate that we are open for business, and I'm open for supporting people. So if you have any questions, send me an email, and I'd be happy to respond to it.
All right, and we'll put our emails in the chat. Thank you again, ISME, for organizing this and for creating space for these conversations. We're happy to stick around if someone had an individual question to connect, and again, feel free to reach out. But I'll hand it back over to Ryan and Sri, and then, like I said, once we stop recording, if you have a question, I think the panelists have we can stay around and continue that conversation as appropriate.
You want to stop recording, Ryan?